Irshad,
All right.
you referred to a couple of logics in relation to the question about empirical absence of functional democracies in Muslim majority countries. The first logic you said was history of Western imperialism, and the second one you said is we must look inwards. So I see that you're basically making some sort of distinction between an external logic and an internal logic, and I think the emphasis of your work and your speech today is primarily to look inwards, and that we have problems within the Muslim world and we must address them, be self-critical. I accept it. My question is it rational to make a clear-cut distinction between the external logic and the internal logic, given the fact that one could also argue that a lot of these societies are at war with external enemies, right? And one could also argue that in order to fight the external enemy, we need unity at home. And feminists have always pointed out that in the name of unity, especially in national liberation struggles, women have lost out. Right? It's not only Muslim countries, across Asia and Africa, whenever there have been freedom struggles, the issue of women's rights and minority rights have been put on the back burner because the question is to put forward a unified front against the external enemy. So my question is, when there could be a legitimate argument that we are facing an external enemy, how do you reconcile that with your crusade primarily directed at domestic reform within Muslim societies? What about the interstate warfare? What about the fact that we are living in a world where so many countries have occupied many parts of the world? I mean, I completely agree with the feminist stance, but I'm saying, how do you reconcile the external logic with the internal logic?
Right. I mean, again, that's a very important challenge, and I don't sit here claiming that I have a glib answer to that question. It is messy. It is nonlinear. It is sometimes even ugly. But once again, I point out that as a journalist, I go right to the source. I go to the people who are engaged in those, messy realities, such as young Muslims in the occupied territories. The quick story here. A couple of years ago, I think it was November 2004, so more than a couple of years ago, when Yasser Arafat died, we heard so much from Muslims in Palestine. What are we going to do without our great leader? This is awful. This is the end of our national liberation struggle. How will we define ourselves now? The very next year, I went to, not to Gaza, I wasn't allowed in there, but I went to the West Bank, but to the heart of the West Bank, Ramallah. And I spoke to a group of students, under the radar, I might add, at An-Najah University in Nablus. And we talked about this very issue, and they said, now that the great man is dead, we can finally speak our minds freely. It is good that he's gone, because you know what? We have to find ways of living peacefully with the state of Israel. And my eyes, I practically bounced out of my head. I said, you mean the Jewish state of Israel? And you should have seen how many people rolled their eyes, like, get with the program, lady. Yeah, we mean the Jewish state of Israel. And they asked me, when you go back to America, because, when you're from Canada, over there, you're still from America. Let's talk about geopolitical generalizations, okay? When you go back to America, you tell them, stop using us as pawns for your power plays and your power games. Yes, we want the occupation to end, but we are also human beings with aspirations and dreams, and we need to find ways of living out those dreams within our societies. So what they were really saying is that the internal tribalism, that suppresses their individuality is as much of a problem as the external war against occupation. And by the way, I did go back to America in order to convey this message, and as luck or divine guidance would have it, the very first place that I spoke right after this visit, Berkeley. And so, a very left-wing campus, right? And I gave exactly this message. A number of students paraded out shouting, neo-colonialist, Zionist crusader, etc. And I shouted back to them how interesting I thought that it was that here they were, presuming to speak on behalf of people on the ground elsewhere, that they know better the reality of their lives, than these kids do. And if that isn't imperialism, I honestly don't know what is.
I'm leaving. No, I'm leaving. I hear you saying a lot of things
strong statements without facts. I was flooded with emails, all those kids, and I was leaving. I'm from Palestine, I'm from Gaza, I live in Ramallah. We never said that we couldn't speak under Arafat. We were not happy that when he died we could speak out. You know, you should just support your things. You just stop saying, oh, a lot of young Muslims, I need numbers about downloads. In Detroit, they told
More than 300,000. There's your number.
You just make strong statements. I will leave you with this thought. If you had written a book about how wonderful Islam is, would you be invited to all these media to be superstar or not? Thank you.
Well, you know, I'll tell you something. There are no shortage of authors who have written books about the beauty within Islam today. For example, Imam Faisal Abdul Rauf, who is a very well-known and much-loved imam from the city of New York, who has written a book expressly in contrast to mine, and he himself has pointed this out, entitled What's Right with Islam Today. And he gets invited to far more institutions, actually, than I do. Whenever I'm invited to institutions, I honestly still expect, you know, from time to time, those invitations to be pulled because of protests and because of fears of protests. And to this day, that is still happening. So, you know, welcome to America and welcome to a relatively open society in which we can still, you know, express diverse points of view. That, by the way, when I say, Yusuf, then I'll really move on from you. When I say, because, you know, you did mention diversity and how much, you know, you oppose this notion that living with offense is the price of living in a diverse society. When I talk about diversity, I don't mean diversity of skin color or diversity of gender or diversity of sexual orientation. I'm talking about a deeper, much more meaningful kind of diversity, and that's intellectual diversity, diversity of ideas and not just identities. And what that does is it allows you as an African-American man and as a Muslim to have your own thoughts and not have to be hidebound by the smug consensus in any one of the identity communities to which you are presumed to belong. And we will.
No.